circulating cells, when I use the word circulating cells, I'm talking about the 3 million cells that go around, cruising around the body, containing everything we need to know, or the body needs to know about itself. The genes and the makeup of the cell and the various functions that each part of the cell performs. So if a person comes in, for example, with I measure the purity of their blood, and it's impure, then I then go to the circulating cells, and that part of the circulating cells that should look after the purity of blood, the lysosomes, I then want to know, is it functioning properly? And if it isn't, when was it functioning properly? Was it functioning when the person was born? It wasn't. Okay then. Was it functioning 11 days after the tube? When I talk about the tube, it's a reference in this anatomy book that the first 10 days you've got the conception taking place inside, they call it the tube. So I just keep talking about the tube, the fallopian tube. So did the lysosomes and the circulating cells, were they 10 out of 10 in the tube? They weren't. Oh, right. Well, they weren't 10 out of 10 in the tube. This is something we've got to tackle from the inheritance point of view. Why the circulating cells are not actually cleaning the blood, because the lysosomes are not working because they're blocked. They're the circulating cells. And I went through the circulating cells, but I'm not saying that I've got every function of the circulating cells, but I analysed out what the book said about the circulating cells. I've got them all listed there. So when I've got a problem with circulating cells, I just put it on that list to see, is it on the list? Yes, it is. Well, is it one of these things? If it is, then I think, oh, well, what's that all about? And I look at my book and analyse out that particular paragraph. In other words, I analyse out the information I want to know, and not, unfortunately, all the information you've got to know. The other thing that I've used, which obviously is not as well as what's said there, is the word phenom. And phenom really means that coming together in your body are the diseases of a particular disease from both lines of the forebears. So you've got a forebear 10 generations ago that got hit by leprosy, and you've got another forebear 5 generations, 15 generations ago that got hit by leprosy. So what comes together is a lot of brown spots, which is a deficiency of PABA, para-aminobenzoic acid, which is one of the B vitamins. And if any patient is short of that particular vitamin, they've got moles and spots. And that, as far as I can gather, comes from leprosy, genetical leprosy. And if you've got spots left and right, that is a phenom, both sides of the body. But if it's on the right side or the left side, then it's not a phenom. It's an inherited from one particular line. So you've got to tackle it in that particular fashion. Either you tackle it collectively, the whole system, you just do one treatment, or you aim to treat one side of the body, not the other side. Because the spots will all be, or the brown moles, or the brown marks, or the skin cancer will be on one side and not the other side. Be on one side of the system. Well, the right side is the mother side, and the left side is the father side, in my experience.
So phenom is an inherited genetic form?
A genetic form, yeah. Well, a disease. Well, okay. Barbara says, let's call it whatever we inherit is a form. Whether it's a disease.
Inherited genetic form.
Yeah, inherited.
Or problem.
Yeah. Then I use the word atoms and ions, which is really a way of measuring the working of the nervous system. Because it's the nervous system, that is one of the functions of the nervous system, the transference of the ions across the membranes. And I just put that in as a form of measurement to see whether there is support from the chemical, electrical side of the system. Because we work chemically and electrically, 50-50. So all our nerve functions are propelled by chemicals as well as electrical. Therefore, when I measure ions or ions, that is what I'm trying to get some a quick reply from the dowsing. Am I dealing with a problem of the peripheral nervous system in one sort or the other? And that you could quickly measure that by measuring ions. Are the ions 10 out of 10? Both chemically and electrically. If they are, well, that's not a problem. If they're not, then we've got a problem in that direction. The other point raised by one or two students is the matrix of the blood. Well, the matrix is the binding agent of the connective tissues. And when I use the word matrix of blood, I want to know whether the blood system has got its connective tissues all being together. Because if you have a deficiency of silica, they come unglued, and you get the arteries breaking down, and the blood moves through the system. So it's very important to check on silica.
The wall you've got.
The walls of anything. It's all glued together, yeah.
The wall.
Yeah, the walls of the organs, the walls of the blood system, the walls of anything in the body is tucked together by this matrix action, sort of tug and glue. Then some of you puzzled when I used the silver chain. And the reason why I use the silver chain really is the fact that if the corpus callosum, which is the massive nerve centers in the brain, if there's a problem there, you're not getting a proper reading from one side of the brain to the other because the messages are not actually sent from one side to the other. So by pushing a chain across the knee, you can actually short circuit that particular part of it. And there is a good chance of getting a reading from the patient of what the problem is in the system. So you don't always get the right reading when the patient sits down and you dowse, because you might only be picking up the left side, not the right side. Or you might not be picking up both sides because there's complete block. So I find a chain across the strategic part will give you a clue as to where the energy is flowing and not flowing. Because if you move the chain up progressively, you'll find it will all of a sudden stop. And that will give you a clue that there's a blockage above that area of some sort or the other. So it's a question really of putting right across there, and that short circuits that.
Is it a question you ask?
No, not really. You just have to do it intuitively, because quite honestly, even reading sounds like an absolute clear-cut reading. But you've also got to sort of assess the patient.
The knowledge, really.
And look and say, you could do a throwaway question. Is this patient bubbling with health? And if it says yes, well, you jolly well know, and if the man looks sickly and he's ready to pop off, or whatever, you know, you're not getting a proper reading of dowsing. You think, well, if I'm not getting a proper reading, maybe this is wrong. So we put a chain across and then have another throwaway question. Is this man bubbling with health? Is this no? If this is no, then you're in. At least in with a fighting chance of actually pinpointing what the problem is, you know, by going up and down the body. And this is what I use the chain for as a second throw to through the normal dowsing. Another point that seems to be a bit hazy is a miasm. What is a miasm? In other words, what did Dr. Holman, that's a doctor, what did he actually mean by miasm? Because he was the one that coined that phrase, that particular statement, miasm. You can't see it, you can't measure it, doesn't come under a microscope, it's scorned by the medical profession because it's an invisible thing. Well, he coined the word miasm to explain the genetical faults that come down family chains. And in his day, in the 17th century, people were settled. And when a doctor treated a grandfather, he also treated the children and the children and children. So you've got 10 generations in one area that's been a 200-year history. And it's well recorded that certain families die of certain problems. And he thought, well, these problems are hereditary. Therefore, they're handed down from generation to generation, but we don't know what they are. So we call it a miasm. And I think a miasm really is a faulty gene. So if you've got, if you're looking for a miasm, just look for a faulty gene. Our genes should reproduce us every day of our lives, 100%. And if any genes are not reproducing the body 100%, then it must be a miasm. In other words, a disease from 100 or something occurred 150 years ago has meant that those children are being reproduced at less than 10 out of 10. From the moment they're conceived, they're just guaranteed not to be reproduced at 10 out of 10. So if the fault is in the gene that relates to the heart, then they've all got heart problems, that family. And if the fault's in the muscles, tibia or spine, they've all got spinal problems. And so on and so forth. So our job really is to see which is the miasm that's causing the problem and removing the blockage on the gene, which will allow the gene to function normally. And that's something that I think will quite time. In other words, I don't have to take the gene out of the body and reassemble it in the laboratory and hopefully put it back into the body and try to get the body to recognize it. You could do that by recognition signals, which are the signals of these single cell plants and so on and so forth, which is on the same wavelength as these genes. And a very clear-cut thing that has sort of really dawned on me is the fact that people's spleens are not being reproduced correctly. And when I go back, I find that this occurred 100 or more years ago. So something occurred in history 100 or 120 years ago, which means that every successive generation, the spleen isn't reproducing itself correctly. So we're getting children in with spleens of 1/10 functioning, or half a tenth. And if the spleen doesn't function, although medically speaking you can remove a spleen because the rest of the immune system can take over, I find that the spleen has a profound influence on the replacement of the villi cells of the small intestines. So that if you measure the villi, the cell replacement of the villi of the small intestines, you will find that the book on anatomy says 3 to 6 days that all the cells in the villi are replaced every 3 to 6 days. Well, if the spleen doesn't work, I'm getting figures of 100 days in people. Now, if your villi isn't being replaced, then your absorption decreases in proportion to that length of time. So people are not absorbing from their food because their villi isn't working. And if the villi isn't working, then they start accumulating fat in the pathways of the small intestine, which then gives rise to this balloon lower bowel. Some people are coming here like tires, you look at that and it's just an absolute massive, complete flab, not flab, it's hard like a football. There's no give at all. And if you measure the replacement of villi in those people, you'll come across 100 days or more. Now, if that doesn't work, if the villi doesn't work, then you've got a complete deficiency of nutrients to all parts of the body. And this is where we've been a little bit aware of what's taking place, is by chasing the results of those deficiencies. But they're not really, they're just malnutrition resulting from the small intestine not working. So really what we've got to do is to go back to the spleen and find out why is the spleen working. And if you dowse yourself and your father and mother and their father and mother, you'll find that the spleen hasn't been right in the world for the last 110 years. Hence asthma, hence skin problems, hence the expansion of all sorts of problems in the last 50 years. Because every 20 years you've got a new generation with a spleen that's less than it was before. And now the all sorts of side issues come in this particular one. It's like a giant, it's a gigantic problem in the world. And then if the spleen doesn't work, you'll find that the vermis of the cerebellum is affected. And the vermis of the cerebellum control all the muscles. And people get weaker. And they don't notice it. They're not as strong as they were. They stop running. They don't feel like doing what they used to do. So and the chest doesn't work because the vermis of the cerebellum control the muscles, the chest muscles that become immovable. So then you're talking about lungs, and you start homing into lungs, but it's nothing to do with lungs. It's to do with the vermis of the cerebellum, which is to do with the spleen, which is to do with a miasm of the forebear, some catastrophic event that occurred. I mean, I had somebody here from Brazil. Now, he was born and bred in Brazil. He's got the same problem. So if somebody in Brazil's got the same problem, Germans have got the same problem, the Europeans have got the same problem, the Australians have got the same problem. I haven't done Malaysia yet. Maybe this Prime Minister of Malaysia's got the same problem. Because the problem here is the fact that the ions are the iron availability in the body of iron becomes less and less, although it doesn't seem to show up in the blood test. I find that if the spleen doesn't work, then the available iron isn't there. And if the available iron isn't there in the brain then loses energy. And this is where we come to the use of the word regulation and ground regulation. Now, this was a phrase I picked up in Cyprus 5 or 6 years ago, where I went to a convention on cancer, and I listened to a professor from Austria, and he was a very knowledgeable man, difficult to follow, but what I picked up from him is you've got to realize the body has is in ground regulation. The body actually organizes your body according to the ability to sustain its reproduction. That's called ground regulation. Now, the other word, regulation, means, or the opposite of that is the negative regulation, is that the body is trying to support that area because there's something wrong with it. Not ground, not half transient. And that blockage is a blockage which is there because there's a fault. Whereas ground regulation is the whole system being reorganized to take into account from the time you were born or before you were born. How the body works. Now, when you approach the system on regulation, are we dealing with ground regulation? If you're dealing with ground regulation, it's like pulling a brick out of a wall. And you keep pulling the bricks, the whole wall comes tumbling down because the body has erected a whole edifice to keep you in harmony because of various faults. So it's no good going into ground regulation, no good going into ground regulation to pull the house down. What you've got to really is to go back and back to find out actually what is the bottom brick or the bottom foundation. What is the foundation that's actually causing the whole lot to become ground regulation? So it's very, very important to actually keep in your own mind that when you're looking at a person who can't walk, that could be ground regulation, taking away the muscles because the nutrients for the muscles are not there. So if you start dealing with the physical part, trying to get them to walk, and they're not being supplied with iron because the spleen's not working, there's no point in homing in on the fact that they're not walking. You've got to home in on the fact that the muscles are not responding because there's something missing in that particular part of the nutrient system. So that is very important to remember ground regulation, and the other word is deviation. It's ground regulation and deviation, not regulations. Ground regulation and deviation. So if it's a deviation, that's something we go for. if it's ground regulation, that's something we avoid. We understand what the body's doing. And we understand that we can't use this arm because ground regulation is stopping us using this arm. Now, why isn't it using this arm? We're paralyzed. So you say, right, okay, we can exercise it. Well, there's no good exercising it if ground regulation is cutting off the muscles because it doesn't want the arm to be used. Then if it doesn't want the arm to be used, then you go back here, it must be something to do with the spine. No, that's a ground regulation because the spine is actually disengaged to stop the hand. So you've got 3 or 4 different disengagement levers being pulled by the body to stop the arm being used, because eventually you get to the heart, because the heart can't sustain the blood flow in both sides of the body, so it cuts off that body. So the problem is not the muscles or the fact that the heart is something, right? The problem is, in a particular instance, it could be that the heart's not, and it hasn't got the power to pump enough blood round, and it would only then, the body, ground regulation will then only allow half the body to be used. The rest of it has to go by the board. And when it goes by the board, you've got ground regulation cutting off the muscles, you've got ground regulation cutting off the spine, ground regulation is cutting off the nerves, and the whole system is disengaged, but there's nothing wrong with the nerves, nothing wrong with the muscles, nothing wrong with the spine. But on the dowsing point of view, everything's wrong. Because you'll check the muscle, 0. It must be the muscle. Or you check the nerve, 0. It's got to be the nerves. And you check the spine, and it's out of place. It's got to be the spine. We've got to do something about the spine. And there's nothing to do with any of those, because that's ground regulation. The levers are being pulled. So just think about levers. Is the body pulling levers, disengaging, knocking it out, like the power stations do when everybody switches on electric light and it can't sustain it, it just switches off the whole area. That whole area is in darkness because it can't sustain the production of enough electricity to keep the demand up what everybody's asking for. And another query was, somebody comes in and you diagnose that they've got a fear which was they were born with, in other words, a genetical fear. And I find it so easy to remove that fear through a blood line. And you could go back any generation, just look around the room and just say, is anybody in this room got a bloodline? I mean, so I've just doused that Ronnie's got a bloodline. And how the hell that happened, I don't know. But I go back and go across your legs. I go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 31 generations. So 31 generations ago, there was a cross somewhere in Northern Europe, and there's a bloodline there. Well, that person can actually take out the trauma. Now, the query asks, what happens when you haven't got a bloodline? What do you do then? So just don't do anything. If you've got an inherited inborn trauma, I mean, Barbara would then say, well, switch over to Dr. Batch. See if you can calm it down with Dr. Batch. Because you keep them comfortable, that's right, yeah. And they do keep them comfortable. They don't kill the problem, but they might erode it gradually, sort of erode it along the line. And you can remove it quite easily with anybody with a bloodline. Anybody else got a flame in this room? No, see. So if you go around them, you might find that such a gigantic race would have expanded the last, 200 or 300 years. There weren't many people on Earth, say 400 or 500 years ago. So there must be a little bit of influence going on somewhere in the system. And when I was in South Africa, I found one of the people I was introduced to. She was a bloodline of mine because 8 generations ago. I said, well, where did you come from then? So they've been in South Africa for 100 and more years, this family. She said they came from Middle Europe somewhere. So that's how it goes. You just sort of track down where that's interesting. Do anything about your family, you know, where they come from, and what's your background, and you could sort of get some idea on your family tree really by keep dowsing bloodlines on anybody you meet, and then you could track down where they come from and where they've been, and that would give you some idea if you're where you. I haven't done an Aboriginal yet, but anyway, that's my sort of approach to these terrible traumas of heritage. I had one patient, and he had these terrible dreams of looking down the courtyard and people being shot. And I tracked it down to his grandmother, who was in the pogroms of Russia. And it was very, very clear that she was in the horror thing, looking down, and it was reproduced in him 3 generations later as a terrible fear that took waking up in this terrible fear. Now, in that particular case, this was some years ago, I think I approached it via the best remedies and best remedies to remove it there. So it's all I'm saying is it's easy to do it if you've got a blood relative. Easy to do. If not, then you've got to go the hard way through the flower. Now, notes. I went through the notes, and I think you're overburdening yourself with a lot of useless garbage. When I measure a patient and I write down 1/10, all you need to say really is general heading, Jack measures from 1 to 10. You don't have to lock yourself down with each individual patient. What you're getting is a broad outline of how I approach each patient. So if I analyse a patient out and they've got 1/10 mercury, sulfur 16, and so forth, and go right through, a lot of you are actually faithfully reproducing those measurements, which is giving you a lot of extra time for no purpose at all. Because I think what you've really got to understand is I measure in tenths of hundredths. If it's 100, it's percentage. So if I measure anything out of 100, I write down percent. If I measure generally a system, I make it 1 out of 10, or half out of 10, quarter, 8, going to ordinary the old time. I haven't switched over to the decimal stuff. I just go quarters, halves, 8, 16, seconds, times, 64, whatever. But although I do that for my personal records here, when the patient comes in, you don't have to do that yourself. I think, by reading through your notes, all you've got to do is measure it in the tenths or twentieths. All nutrients are done in tenths. All one's 10, whether you absorb it or then you break down the tenth into smaller units.
Is it not more to write, though, to write measurement 1 to 10 than just write 1/2, and then you know that you've measured it when it's a half?
Yeah, it's right. Well, yeah. Half of what? Half of 1/10.
Well, half of a tenth.
So when I write down half, it's always the last one. I've gone down from 10 and 75 to 1, but it's below that. So then I'll split that one down into half, quarter, and so forth. Really got to work in with what we call these the mainstream people. And I've said to them, well, I'm sorry, I can't do anything more for you. You've got to come off your drugs. The doctor says I can't. Well, the only alternative is place someone on the medical list or something like that to come off the drug. Then you can come back to me again. Then I can work with a clean body, which you can't at the moment. So you've got to recognise your limitations in many instances. Which we're going to instruct the muscles, tendons and ligaments to pull this joint back into the socket. We're going to instruct the arteries, veins and capillaries to start flooding the area with blood, flooding the area with nutrients. We're going to ask the lymphatic system to clean all the impurities out of this area. We're going to instruct the bone systems to completely harden that area with graphite, the ball joint and the socket with graphite and carbon. Going to instruct the nerves to rebuild the connection between the brain and this socket. So the nerves, the synapse flow is strong and perfect. We're going to instruct the synovial fluid to flow strongly and lubricate that area. And for the ball joint to pull back, be pulled back into the socket.
Okay.
Really? Really?
Swimming again.
You're already thinking of swimming, are you?
I used to love swimming.
Yeah. It's better, isn't it? Maybe for you. I'll do the other side when I see you again. Can't do it. Yeah. So we've got the left socket and ball joint. And that's now correct. Back into the joint. So for my daughter, Arabian, has put a radio recorder here, and all these have all gone, all these sockets. 49876543210 0, and it was just held there. And that's just as simple as a recorder. A whole lot more is just done. Okay. Yeah, this is the reason why I switched over to plastic. I would say to the patient, be careful, don't do it, don't hold them in the back. Don't hold them in the palm of the hand, whatever you do. Take them to the temple and you walk out holding them in the palm of the hand. Don't put them in the car and don't put them in the radio. So you do the speakers. And all these biopathic tablets have got energy. And the energy is on sugar. I didn't think electrical would completely remove the energy from the tablets. Perhaps we should look around and I thought, what they're doing there. Now, this is in a plastic. And it's still okay. They've just extracted the hydrogen peroxide that's lying in the brain, preventing you absorbing silicon, which meant that your tendons didn't have any silicon, they would get snapped without silicon. Anything without silica would go fragile. Anyway, you've got silicon. You've got synovial fluid, and your arm back in the ball joint.
Don't you really?
And she's a natural healer. Now, if I measure your healing power, put your hand out. 1, 2, 3. See now, if I measure your healing in terms of 100 upwards, if I measure anybody with healing power 20 or 30, they might. When they get to 100 items, they well, you've got potential. So you've all got potential for 100. The real healers, 500. Now, young little Ileana is 600. And she keeps putting her hands on her mother. So the other significant part is that she's always getting her energy holding her hand out to pick up energy from the piece of one. So it's practice. And you can practice with the hand. You can put your hand on whatever part you want to shift. And if the pendulum doesn't move, forget it for a moment, but keep practicing. Because your neurons will develop as you practice, as you concentrate. Your brain, the atom molecules in your brain, ions, I-O-N-S, will keep on exciting the cells to develop new neurons to develop this particular power that's in the cell. Just keep practicing. It goes for anybody with a particular pain, just put a hand there, and if the pendulum doesn't move, you're not putting any power in. If the pendulum moves, then it will agitate when you meet the obstruction of the problem you're trying to heal. Yeah, a lot of people get excited. If you look at the healers at some of these exhibitions, and you can see the way they do the contortions, tremendous lot of put in, and they've got their hands on. And that isn't healing at all. And real job, you put your hand on and the energy just flows in, and the healing takes place. And it's just, you can all be it, you can all practice, and you can all tune in as well. I mean, you can tune into me. That would get wherever you are, just tune in, and that will give you the extra power for being the conductor. And then you can see the difference. Just try healing, then tune into me, and then see what works, where the pendulum moves.